I feel quite old already. EPPC, great to see you. Hope you're having a great conference so far. A real privilege to be in front of you today giving a keynote. I'm the only non-Microsoft person giving a keynote here. And you're going to hear some things from me that maybe you won't hear in some of the other talks. To continue Yusi's theme of what AI will tell you, maybe it's about saying the quiet part out loud. There are lots of things for us to think about at the moment, lots of changes in the technologies that we work with. But that all works, paying attention to that only and really focusing on it, that all works when we're in a period of normality. I think the reality is we're not. And so there are other things that we need to consider as well. And my goal here is to maybe help you see a couple of things that are happening that are maybe not front of mind, maybe not on the radar. Think about how your organizations, your employers are thinking about things, and maybe just kind of give you a few thoughts of things to take forward into the next part of your career and what will keep you valuable. And hopefully, we'll have some fun along the way. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at a company called Advania. I've been in the company for 12 or so years. I've been an MVP for 18 years now, which is a huge privilege in itself. Giving me great access to Microsoft, giving me great access to lots of organizations and their boardrooms. That photo is very old. It's about 10 years old. I think I use it for a bit of nostalgia. My twin boys are now 16, going on 17. I think one of the main reasons I keep it, not only because I've kind of got more hair and better skin there, but quite honestly, they walk into the room sometimes as I'm putting the PowerPoint deck together, and nothing winds them up more than seeing that photo. So things that we're going to cover then. We're going to look at other times in history where we've had a really big technology shift or a kind of new invention, and what happens when it's hard to make the comparison and there's no precedent. And then we're going to think about some of the world that we've built. You know, we're used to the internet working a certain way, and some of these things got laid down over 20 years and 30 years, but they're starting to change now, and it's impacting many organizations. But it's also impacting us as individuals. It's impacting how we solve problems. It's impacting what's valuable. And it's really having an impact on careers. And I kind of want to bring this to some specific focus to what it means for people in the Power Platform, Dynamics, and business applications in particular. And then we'll finish with some kind of general thoughts on how do you stay valuable. We are not in a stable economy at the moment. You know, we're not in a high-growth economy. Geopolitical impact is there in the boardrooms of many organizations. So what does this mean when you're trying to think about where do you focus, how do you think, how do you stay valuable? I'm going to give you some of my thoughts about tips and tricks and skills and changes to make. Let's think about some of the major technology waves that we've seen. And it's interesting, you know, could you name the 4 or 5 technology waves that we've seen in the last 10 or 20 years? Again, you know, you probably intrinsically know them, but they're not always front of mind for us. The internet was the first, of course, or one of the first in this era. Kind of created a whole breed of winners and losers. You probably know about the dot-com boom. So much money sloshing around at that time, but then lots of companies going bust. They had perhaps a good idea in some ways, but they couldn't commercialize it. And we just thought the entire world was changing, and it did in many ways. You know, we didn't go back to pre-email. We didn't go back to buying everything from a physical store. And Amazon and others kind of established themselves as, you know, they could be the fastest route for you to get a product into your hands. But they didn't solve everything. Sometimes when you don't know what the product is that you want, you know, Amazon can't help you that much. But it did create an entire new breed of company that didn't exist before. And then we had mobile. The iPhone in 2007 changed pretty much everything. We had fast internet access by then, and the ability to have, you know, 1,000 apps in your pocket, and that really changed everything. And then we came into kind of the 2010s with cloud, and everything in technology and IT shifting from being behind the firewall, being owned and managed by the organization to maybe in the cloud with this kind of elastic compute that we've got. And that quickly was followed by SaaS, of course. And if you know anything about the SaaS space, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of SaaS products. Every possible need, every possible industry, every possible part of an organization can be covered by one or more SaaS applications. And I suppose a question is, did you adapt to any of these? Did you need to? Kind of depends on your age and how old you are, but I distinctly remember thinking, what do I need to do? Do I need to make any changes to my career given this shift? And some cases I did, some cases I didn't. I definitely changed what I was doing as the internet came around and thought about being a mobile developer, but decided against that. Definitely invested in cloud skills as that era came about. And all of this, of course, led us to the really big change, which, of course, is blockchain. I'm just kidding. But it goes to show, some of these things that you think are going to be an era-defining technology, some of them are clearly not. So it's trying to understand what's the hype and what's the reality. Blockchain still waiting to revolutionize our world. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But of course, AI is really what we're here to talk about. The key distinction between all these previous shifts and AI is that none of these previous shifts did human work. They were all things that accelerated us. They helped us get work done, but they didn't do the work, and AI can. So this is why this is not a normal time, and we need to think about it in a certain way. With that, though, we are being hit across the head daily by the impact of AI, and it gets fatiguing, it gets tiring. So there's a balance to be had between tuning into so much of this, but understanding what is changing in the world. Lots of questions that don't have an answer yet. Do we destroy a load of jobs with AI? Do we create enough new jobs? What spaces emerge that didn't exist before? 60% of the jobs that we have today did not exist in 1940. So that gives us confidence that new spaces emerge, new jobs and roles and functions emerge. But in truth, we don't have all of the answers to these things. Kind of interesting to think that if we kind of go back in time, it wasn't supposed to be like this. We were actually supposed to be having a time and a life of much more leisure than we do today. So if you ever tune into people like J.M. Keynes, one of the fathers of economics, I studied economics at university, the thing that he was preoccupied by is what we would do with our time at this point. So we're approaching the time when he was making this prediction. So it was made in the 1930s. We're only 4 years away, really, from the time that he was talking about. And really, the thing that was the concern was, what will we do with all of this free time that technology and automation and advancements have created? And actually, does society start to crumble? Do people gravitate towards crime because they've got so much time on their hands and maybe a smaller mission or purpose? And that was the real preoccupation with lots of intellectuals and economists at the time. I don't know about you, it's not quite transpired, has it? We're working harder than ever. We're spending more of our time, more of our lives than we might have anticipated, doing work, doing labor. So it's interesting, we've had huge technological advancements. They haven't really changed kind of human impact, how human time gets spent. And it's also interesting to think that, again, if you take that economist point of view, there's a lot of debate about whether these major technology advancements that really did revolutionize so much of our world, whether they enabled us to create more output, to produce more than we would have done already. And lots of debate around that. Kind of depends how you measure it. Clearly, these things that did have a big impact, though. Again, sticking with these times when we didn't really know what to think, how to anticipate the change that we were embarking on. Interesting to think about when we invented electricity. Of course, we were very scared of it. We didn't really know how this was going to change the world. And people were concerned because it was this invisible force. It wasn't like horses or steam power. And people started to ask questions like, if you can instantly control when it's day and when it's night, what impact does that have on the world? Will people sleep? Do we end up with lots of kind of nervous disorders because we've got this control? Eyesight damage? And people didn't really know how to think about it. Even before that, the invention of the bicycle was a big concern. And you might know about bicycle face, which is experts at the time were predicting that people that rode bicycles into the wind, their face would stay kind of set in a certain expression that they wouldn't be able to control. And we were also concerned that, hey, if women and children could move around, just at their own leisure, what does that mean to society and marriages and relationships? And that was the bicycle. So really interesting to think about these previous times. Of course, when we invented the motor car, that was a big deal too. They were branded devil wagons because we thought that they would, again, have a negative impact on society. We thought they would terrify horses, only benefit the rich. I'm not sure if you know what AI is depicting in this image, but in the UK, we had a law to say any motor car, there had to be a man walking in front with a big red flag to warn everybody of the danger. But it got even better. This is AI's attempt at depicting this. So in the United States, Iowa, the state, they came very close to passing a law to say if somebody was driving a motor vehicle down the road and they encountered a horse, immediately they had to drive into the nearest field, take apart all of the pieces of the car and cover it with something before the horse could see it. Because they didn't know what the horse would do. Would the horse flip out and do something crazy and injure people? So the safest thing was if we pass a law to make sure that the horse's eyes can never come into contact with the motor vehicle. Coming into kind of more modern times, you probably know about comics. Comics, it engendered this fear of a big moral panic that we would come into a world where every young person in the world would gravitate to violence, they'd become delinquent, maybe they'd go towards Satanism. And we censored comics. In the US, we created the Comics Code Authority, and that was really the kind of piece of government that would analyze every image and every word in a comic, and lots of them were censored and couldn't publish. So all along, we've had these things, rock and roll music, television, of course, all of these things we thought, it's an advance, certainly, but maybe it's not net positive for the world. Perhaps the moral is that we're not always that good at kind of understanding how these things are going to play out. We're pretty bad at predicting. So when you think about some of the things that we're thinking, saying about AI today, history tells us that we don't always have the answers. Sometimes we underestimate the long-term benefits. Sometimes we overstate the threats. All up, we're not so good at trying to imagine what is going to happen. It's very difficult when there's no precedent. Okay, let's think about kind of the more modern world that we built and maybe what's changing. So we're all used to a free internet. We don't pay to use it. And you can argue that we pay with our data and we exchanged all our privacy for cat photos and funny videos and things like that, and that's certainly true. The thing that makes the internet free at point of use is effectively advertising and targeting. That's why we've ended up with this world. We ended up with freemium services, and then maybe you can pay to get to a higher tier, maybe remove advertisements, maybe secure your data in a better way, different flavors of this. But ultimately, it's advertising and targeting and personalization that is fueling our free internet. And there's no owner, no country, no organization. Nobody owns the internet. We decided this was too big for anybody to own, and the world did the right thing on that. We also don't have too many laws around the internet. And that generally works well for us, supports entrepreneurship, supports lots of things that we want to create and use the internet for. Didn't work out perfectly for social media. I think we're coming to the realization now we made some mistakes there, and the free internet was a little bit too free. But in this space, we saw the emergence of quite a few dominant organizations. So you think of search and Google, perhaps. You think of social, well, Meta, of course. Microsoft staked their place with enterprise computing and the technology that organizations use. Apple and Google and the likes of Samsung in mobile and consumer, Amazon in retail, of course. Now, all of these companies establish some kind of flywheel. So for Google, and to a certain extent Meta, what they realized is the more data you could collect from people, the more accuracy, the more you could understand the user base, then the more you could tune content and relevance. And that would bring advertisers to you. And more advertisers meant more users and more revenue. And that fuels investment to kind of go around the flywheel again. With Meta, they had a network effect. So in the early days of Facebook, what drove their growth, and to a certain extent Instagram today, and WhatsApp, is that everyone I know is here. That's their flywheel. And once you've got that network effect, it's really hard for others to break in. With Microsoft, what they did very well is target app developers in their early days, because they realized that if you could have an ecosystem with amazing applications that solve problems, that would get adoption, that would drive familiarity, that would drive standards, and organizations would become dependent on it. And more apps would get created, more problems to be solved, more enterprise trust, and so on. And that's what Microsoft did well. With Apple, of course, it's create great devices, attract developers, create applications, create great devices, you've got ecosystem lock-in. All of these organizations found a way of either using their early mover advantage, finding a network effect, or being the distributor of this experience and really leveraging on that. And once you're in that space, it's kind of hard. A great example is search, of course. So Google set out to organize the world's information, and they saw that as their mission, and they saw search as being the key ingredient to this. Now, really interesting to think about this. So you probably know that Microsoft spent a lot of money on search. And perhaps the Microsoft folks in the room won't thank me for shining a light on this, but Microsoft have now invested $100 billion in Bing. Their market share at its peak, so now, is just 4.7%. So Google is 91.2%. So it just goes to show that, once you've lost that moment, once you've lost that opportunity, it becomes really difficult to catch up. And those are Satya's words in a court case a few years ago, where he was telling the judge, look, we lost that one. We have tried everything that we cannot catch up. And you could argue maybe Satya is kind of playing a tactical move there. The point he's trying to make is that Google have this dominant position and there's something not fair about it. But the reality is Microsoft lost that one. Very hard for them to catch up unless something changes in the industry or the legislation. Something else that emerged is kind of the gatekeepers of the internet and what we see. So search and the information that we consume, apps, the kind of businesses that get presented to us. Any business owner will tell you that if you're on page 2, you're nowhere. And what we're really seeing is an internet and a system where it's controlled by a few companies. They control what's in front of our eyeballs. And of course, there are taxes to pay and tolls to pay here. So the kind of common 30% App Store tax for any developer or organization putting something into an App Store. So again, if you can establish a position as being that kind of gatekeeper, that discovery platform, you're in a completely winning position. We came into this world where there are a million apps, and many of them are SaaS, and every particular industry, every particular space has all of these apps. And most organizations, I think the belief is that most organizations probably using 100 plus applications these days. Becomes ever harder to kind of understand what's out there in the technology landscape. But these are some of the key pillars of the world that we built. So it gets interesting to think what stays of this and what goes behind, what gets impacted. And the truth is, again, this is a huge shift. Not all of this stays in place. You think about kind of how the space is evolving in terms of how problems get solved, how software and applications are changing. And now, whether you call it vibe coding, whether you call it agentic software development. How we create software is never going back. It's changing dramatically. And all of the kind of vibe coding platforms, they're growing at a huge rate. They're getting lots of AI investment. And this becomes something big for most organizations to pay attention to. It's quite ironic, actually. Will all of them survive? Well, probably not, no. There'll be some consolidation. There'll be some rationalization. But we are in a time where how organizations have solved problems and how software has worked is really changing, despite being set for 20 years or more. So why is this happening? Well, I think we all intrinsically know that we've kind of seen huge AI developments in the last few years, and really interesting to think about, the journey that we've been on just briefly. So one way of thinking about it is that in image recognition, for example, until a few years ago, AI was terrible at understanding which one of those is the blueberry muffin. But hopefully you all can intrinsically know in a few milliseconds which one to eat and which one to pat on the head. But AI would really struggle with more of this data. It turns out that when you're confronted by a bigger data set, this doesn't get easier to solve necessarily. It gets more difficult. And we invented AI in the 1960s, as you probably know. This is nothing new. But at the same time, the reason why the world is changing is because we've suddenly had these huge advances. So in image generation and image recognition, we had the diffusion models, and they were very different to everything that went before. In kind of transformers and GPTs, we had the attention is all you need paper in about 2018, which really changed the path of AI, changed all of the kind of way of thinking from GANs, generative adversarial networks, to the GPT and transformer model that fueled ChatGPT and Anthropic and Copilot and everything else. So you're probably all used to seeing that models, they're only as, today they're as bad as they're ever going to be. They only ever get better from here. And the pace that they get better is accelerating. So what we think of AI today will radically change even in the next few years. This pace is not letting up. But how real is this? We sort of know that all of the AI frontier labs, all of their CEOs are banging the drums that this is going to change the world, and if you're not spending money with us today, you're going to be left behind. But how real is this? Well, one way to think about it is to take an independent view. And GDP-Val is something that you may or may not have heard of. This isn't anything that's run by OpenAI or Anthropic or Microsoft or Google or Amazon. Nobody like that. This is from a kind of independent set of institutions. And what they do is take a whole load of industry tasks where these are expert tasks that may take hours or days. And the question being asked is today's latest models capable of doing the task better than an expert human? And the people that decide aren't AI experts, they're the human experts in that field. So it could be finance or law or HR or marketing or construction or engineering or facilities management. And we've got these series of around 220 tasks, and we've been measuring for a little while now which is better, the human or AI. And the grading is done, it's a blind grading system where we compare two bits of output, one by AI, one by a human, and the expert in that industry decides. We're now at the point where 83% of the tasks in this set of 220 tasks are being done at least as well or better by AI. So we can debate whether the CEOs of the frontier lab companies are kind of hyping up AI more than the rest of the world is ready for. But the reality of it is that AI is now capable of so much of human work. So that does raise some questions. We are kind of really seeing this. It's not taken impact across the world yet. We talk about the diffusion phase. And this doesn't happen in 1 year or 2 years. It typically happens in 5 years, 10 years, sometimes 15. I think we don't know what the diffusion phase will be for AI, but it's likely to be faster than so many of the other things that have transformed the world. So, What impact is this having on some of the world that we created? Well, you might have heard of this thing called the SaaS apocalypse. You may not, but I tune into the business world as much as the technical world. And this is fascinating because so many of these long-established pillars of our world and long-established kind of approaches to software and solutions, they're really changing. One of the big moments was actually when Anthropic launched Claude Cowork. And of course, this was the first time that AI was truly taking on more of the task, more of the work. It's agentic AI that can effectively take on the work, operate a computer, use a browser, do complex, long-running tasks, effectively almost like be used as an outsourced partner for so many bits of complex work, hopefully with a human in the loop. And what the world started to realize is that so many of the pieces of software that were all based on the idea of human using software at a computer, actually what happens if AI agents can do this? And so many organizations immediately lost a lot of their value. And the markets were starting to say a couple of things. Well, what does this world of software look like if AI can do so much of this work? And hang on a minute. If we don't need as many humans doing it, but so many of these pieces of software are sold per seat, what does that mean for these companies? And to a certain extent, we don't have all of the answers yet, but this was having a really big impact. So if you follow stock markets or stock prices or valuations, you'll know that in a given day, a movement of 1% is generally quite big. In some cases, these are over 10%. And quite soon after, there was more of this. So Anthropic released a whole bunch of legal plugins and financial plugins, industry-specific things. And that really had an impact. And on the very same day, OpenAI launched what they call their frontier agent, which is confusing for us in the Microsoft world, but that's how they name it. Essentially, it's an agentic AI that is industry-specific, that's been trained to understand how people in that industry work and can take on more of the tasks, more of the work. At this point, lots of companies really lost a lot of their value. And it's big-name companies, some in the particular spaces, so some in legal or marketing or HR, but some more general technology giants like Salesforce and Adobe, Atlassian, and so on. And the net effect of this is that so much of this world started to become unraveled. And you might think, well, okay, it's just the business world, it's just software, it's just markets, and to a certain extent all of that is true, but this was unprecedented. We've had stock markets and software for 30 years or more. What we saw is that in 48 hours, 285 billion was wiped off the software market. Nothing like it had ever happened in history. And it starts to kind of just shine a light on one corner of the change that's happening, and in particular the software change. Now, I'm not sure if you've ever seen this, but let me show you. This is just a fun kind of look at this world. It's a website called deathbyclaude.com. And Death by Claude is somebody's kind of, it's very clever, it's very witty, and what you can do here is find a list of software companies, and there's kind of a rating on how at threat they are. So these are all kind of the major SaaS providers. So if we pick one, let's pick Atlassian. Does anybody use Jira or Confluence? Or yeah, a few people. I mean, very common. So if we take a look at what Death by Claude thinks, so it's kind of analyzing the company, it's thinking about what they do, it's thinking about how valuable they are in the age of AI, and there's always these kind of witty kind of summaries and conclusions. And what they're saying is, well, yeah, Atlassian kind of built a 50 billion business around just ticket tracking. And can AI do some of this? Well, yeah, very possibly. So they're in a critical state. And actually, if you look, we've got this kind of figure of that's their stock price, their impact in the last year. So down 71%, which is huge, obviously. And Death by Claude is awesome. It even goes as far as creating you the markdown file that would replace Atlassian. It kind of gives a death certificate and exactly what would be on the death certificate for this company if it was a real life, and even kind of what Claude would say. And look, it's fun, but it's also very serious. When you've got 20 minutes, I would encourage you to play around with this, pick your favorite SaaS company, see what the verdict is, see whether we think that they will survive in the age of AI. There's a lot of cleverness there. Death by Claude also had a kind of a sister website that the same person created called Replaced by Claude. And in that instance, it's not available on the internet anymore, but you could put in a LinkedIn profile, and Replaced by Claude would analyze the LinkedIn profile, the career history, this person, and really think about whether they could be replaced by a markdown file. The good news is, according to that, I am 62% a bot, which sounds about right. So having a really big impact then on the world of software. But it's also true to say some of this came back. So we had the SaaS apocalypse. It got a lot of media attention. But the truth is some of these companies have rebounded since. So it's a little bit mixed, and we have to be honest about this. Still, there has been a major reset in software. What you'll see is that there are some winners and some losers. And there's a lot of numbers and kind of digits on this slide. I suppose the thing to look for is the two right-hand columns where there's a big gap between the numbers. So these are the ones that haven't made it back. And you can even see it in the kind of category where some are just left behind. And it's big names. And apologies if people in the room work for these companies, but in the spirit of kind of saying these things out loud, as it were, this is what the market is saying about the impact of AI. So people like Adobe and Workday and Atlassian and DocuSign and HubSpot and some others really feeling the impact. And these are businesses that we probably all know the names of. Maybe they're used in our companies, but open questions about whether they all survive or not. The markets are thinking that some are still at risk. So what makes a company able to stay safe? And then what could we take from that as individuals? Well, in the products and software world, there are commonly thought to be a few things that keep a company safe from AI. And sometimes it's where the company is that distributor, or they've got some kind of network effect. They're able to kind of be that established platform, and there's nothing really AI could do to change that. Or maybe it's just that they've got the customer base. They are embedded in all of these organizations in the world, and no amount of vibe coding or AI is really going to replace that system because there are many reasons for it to exist already. In some cases, it's because it's a specialist system. And that's not true of things like Asana or maybe Monday.com. These are the platforms that can be highly valuable, but they kind of don't do too much that's industry specific. They don't really relate to a particular domain. They don't support like a legal workflow or a HR workflow or even a ticketing workflow with ServiceNow or Zendesk or somebody like that. Another moat, another barrier to entry is cash. So actually this can keep a company safe where you can invest in lots of things like building data centers and AI infrastructure, for example, where other companies don't have that cash, and it's a barrier to entry. So that keeps you safe as long as you use the cash wisely. So there are a few things that keep products safe, for sure. And really interesting to think about some of the SaaS companies that are adapting. So this is Salesforce, and they're making big changes. They're kind of coming to the realization that, well, if we don't have as many humans using our CRM and ERP platform, what if we just open the whole thing up and we create all of the MCPs and all of the APIs and an entire agentic framework so that you could have agents in any particular technology that call into our platform? We hope to be more than just a dumb database. We're going to provide the workflow and the process and some of the governance, but we accept the whole world is going to use our platform from their own agents, not our screens. And so they're thinking of it as a headless ERP or CRM. Now, whether you're in software or not, I think there's something to reflect on about the questions that every company is asking right now. And the reality is you may not know what is being said by the leaders in your boardroom or the boardrooms of your clients. And there's no shame in that. These aren't conversations that you're necessarily exposed to. But believe you me, pretty much every company in the world is asking the same questions, which, our business model and how we make money. Is AI changing that? Does this really impact how we sell work? If you're a consultancy, then you're probably used to selling projects and billable hours. But then if I could do something that used to take 80 days and I could do it in 8 days, what does that mean for that company? You probably can't charge 80 days. If you now charge for 8 days, well, have you got 10% of the revenue coming in? So these are some of the big questions. But then, does AI open up new opportunities for new services or products, new efficiencies in the business? Does it enable us to take cost out? People are looking at that, obviously. But then also, does it create new threats for us? Could AI native companies come in and do what we do and do it in a quicker, cheaper, more effective way because they don't have our baggage? They don't have our history, they don't have our systems, our processes and ways of thinking. What about cyber threats from AI? We all know kind of what mythos and fable have started in the world. And I think, look, let's be honest, the other question that pretty much every company is asking is, can we do the same thing as we do today with less people? Let's be honest, that is one of the key questions in every boardroom. And for people that deliver services, so if you work for a Microsoft partner or a tech service provider of some sort, one of the other questions is, okay, if organizations are changing all of their spend to AI, how do we capture some of that? How do we make sure it doesn't just go to Anthropic and OpenAI and maybe Microsoft and AWS and Google? How do we get some of that if that's where companies are spending money? So these are the topics in just about every boardroom from every organization I've spoken to recently. What does this mean for us? What's the impact on our careers? How do we need to think about this? Well, I appreciate that most of us in this room are kind of makers, architects, consultants. Maybe we've got some kind of systems engineers and IT pros, maybe some developers. But think about developers in particular. So that world is changing hugely. And if you tune into some of the Reddit discussions, which I do in my doom scrolling hours, really fascinating to see some of the discussions on Reddit. So lots of people saying, I haven't written a line of code in 6 months, and neither has anybody in my team. And these discussions are really interesting. Developers saying, I've kind of automated most of my own job. And in this case, it worked because the engineer was kind of resolving tickets from a backlog. So he's got an entire pipeline of agents that read the new backlog item, that decide whether it's a bug to fix or a new feature to implement, agents that go off and write that code, generate the tests, run all of the integrations. He'll review the output before doing a commit, but ultimately, agents doing most of the work. And the discussion is kind of punctuated by lots of, yeah, that's great, but don't tell the bosses. But then also, what does that mean for juniors? We all know that this is having a big impact on the bottom rung of the ladder. But these fields are changing dramatically for sure. And I spent 20 years as a developer. I led development teams. I was highly technical. I spent my entire world understanding the syntax, the language, the APIs, the database methods, made that my expertise. That world is gone. That world doesn't really exist anymore. Not to say that you can outsource so much to AI, but the reality is, to be an amazing developer these days, it's really about how amazing you are at steering AI and getting the most from it. You're not needing to know the exact details of API methods and surface areas. And if you're a developer, I do think you absolutely need to shift to this model right now, because others are doing it, and the writing is on the wall for people that don't shift. So thinking about this with a Power Platform lens then, how do you stay valuable as a maker, as a builder? Maybe that's the relevant question. But really, this isn't the question. Perhaps a bigger question to ask is, should you even still be a Microsoft builder? This world is changing. Other companies are emerging. The entire space that we work in is kind of under attack in some ways. Power Platform, Dynamics, let's think about this for a second. So I think that's the question, should you even be a Microsoft builder? And maybe if we look at this in a different way and restate the question, is Microsoft still a good place for your career? So again, you're going to hear some things from me that you're maybe not going to hear from some of the other keynotes. Let's think about what's happening. So we're talking about these new entrants, the new way of creating software, the impact that it's having on established software companies. And in reality, why build a Power App? Why kind of get caught up in canvas apps, model-driven apps, when AI can just create a richer, faster, more fluid application, probably in less time? That's what's disrupting this world. And so, if you're a Power Platform professional and this isn't front of mind for you, well, I'm not sure there are any rights and wrongs in this, but my advice would be to think about it. Thinking about other aspects. So thinking about platforms like Dynamics. We're coming to this realization that the whole world of humans driving screens, that's collapsing a little bit. But entire systems and platforms are based on that. They are forms and workflow over data, but intended for humans to use. And Charles Lamanna has said it himself, so I'm not sure if you've seen this quote, but I recommend you listening to the podcast, where he's saying, the age of business apps is over. Now think about that for a second. This is the executive that reports to Satya and is accountable for the entire commercial success and revenue impact of Dynamics and Power Platform and Copilot Studio in the world. So, it's not lost on Microsoft that some of this is really changing. Now, is Charles really saying that Dynamics is dying or Power Platform is dying? Well, not quite. But he is saying something is significantly changing, and a whole era that existed for 20 years or more is probably over. The other impact is really around per-seat licensing. So much of what Microsoft have earned money from, and so much that we have attached our careers to, per-seat licensing is a big part of that. You think about E3, E5, to a certain extent, Power Apps licensing, Power Automate licensing, that's been per seat. But what happens when you have fewer humans? Those business models are under threat. So you look at Microsoft and you have to objectively say a few things about their world are changing significantly. So what can we think of really in terms of what this means for Microsoft, what this means for those of us that invested so much of our career around Microsoft? What are the implications, and what can we observe from what Microsoft are doing? So we think about those threats and we think about really what's changing. So the threat of vibe coding and the idea that AI can code apps faster. Well, what we're seeing is Microsoft bringing that into the Power Platform. So the advent of code apps and generative pages and Microsoft ultimately trying to position the Power Platform as being the home, as being the underlying platform for apps that can be created that way. So don't compete against it with the old constructs. Just completely reinvent the platform almost and adapt to that. Now the question becomes, does the Power Platform offer something more than Lovable or Replit or Versal or so many of the others that are the vibe coding platforms? Do they become a better receiver for these apps? Well, remains to be seen, but you would argue that there is a lot in the Power Platform that isn't just the app surface, so they have a good chance, yeah. And then thinking about the fact that create, read, update, delete apps, humans and forms and workflow, all of that is changing with agents. Well, think about what's happening in Dynamics. Microsoft responding very fast, released many agents inside the Dynamics platform that can not only support humans, but can actually do some of the tasks. So in the sales side, that can do the prospecting, that can find the opportunities, that can convert the lead to an opportunity, that can create campaigns and outreach and take on so much more of the work. Well, that's what these platforms have to do. And Microsoft are right there with Dynamics. The other side is, okay, so what happens about maybe it's stuff that doesn't happen in the platform. Maybe it's something really tailored or bespoke, but it's right for our organization. Well, Microsoft trying to position Copilot Studio as the best home, the best platform for all of these agents. We're seeing all of the changes in terms of how we build agents, the skills framework, how we call into tools, all of that changing and evolving. And really what Microsoft are trying to do is position that as the best place to build agents. Agent 365 is the best way to govern them, but with deep integration, the things that others cannot do. We've still got other things to deal with, though. So what happens in a world where we need less licenses? Well, Satya is on record in the last earnings call as saying that any per-user business of Microsoft is going to change to a per-user and usage business. They recognize this. They recognize that their business model has to shift. And we're seeing this with Copilot Cowork. So if you're paying attention to that, then obviously we've got the Microsoft 365 Copilot license, but then the usage on top. And we've had this reaction that, gosh, Copilot seems expensive, it needs governance. But arguably, Microsoft are being more honest in their pricing of this. So in this shift to consumption-based pricing, they've said, look, we're going to invent models that are tuned for co-work, where prices will come down. This is probably as expensive as it will ever be. We will optimize this, and we'll also give you the governance controls. Contrast that with Anthropic and Claude. I think we all know that Anthropic are probably going to raise prices significantly once they're after IPO. And we're in this continued phase of them subsidizing things. Same for OpenAI. I'm not sure if your company makes profit or a loss. OpenAI and Anthropic making losses. OpenAI lose $12.8 million per employee per year. Now, I don't know what your salary is, but that's almost like UC's salary. So Microsoft arguably making all of the right changes that we'd like to see. But then let's think about other things that are kind of worthwhile considering. What's Microsoft's moat? What protects them from the attackers? Well, first of all, think about their role as distributors. We talked about these kind of platforms that become the distribution, and that's kind of a difficult position to beat. 3.7 million companies across the world on Microsoft 365. Over 445 million paid seats. So they have the distribution. They also own the app service. They own Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams, SharePoint. This is where work gets done, and Microsoft own that. They also own identity. So with Entra, that's become the global dominant identity platform that's used for authorization of just about everything. That's an advantage. They also own most of the world's enterprise data. With Microsoft 365 and Azure and SharePoint and Dataverse, this is where most companies store a lot of their data. Not all of it, some of it not their mission-critical data if you're a bank or an insurance company, but still, most of the organization's data for most of the organizations in the world is with Microsoft. Microsoft also are trusted. So over the last few years, the last couple of decades, they've built a position where most organizations in the world, they talk about the trusted boundary that Microsoft as an ecosystem offers them. And what we're increasingly seeing is companies rejecting SaaS because that stores data outside. They store it on their platform, and that's outside of our trusted boundary. So not everybody is a huge kind of 100% fan of Microsoft, but the reality is organizations trust Microsoft. They also have an ecosystem, us, people that are hungry, talented, enthusiastic, that can find opportunities and build on the Microsoft platform and actually turn that into value for organizations. All of those vibe coding companies, they have a tiny ecosystem and a tiny set of enthusiasts and partners, but nothing like the Microsoft world. Microsoft also have a lot of cash, and that's another barrier to entry for others. So that enables them to become an AI player, to make some big bets, to even fund some moonshots like Quantum. And if they don't all pay off, well, that's okay. Microsoft have the cash, as long as they use it wisely. The final one that kind of isn't in this list, but I call it out especially is Microsoft are good at reinventing themselves. if you haven't realized what Microsoft are extraordinarily good at over the last 40 or 50 years is reinventing the entire company and pivoting when the world changes. And so, Microsoft have a moat that I think is pretty much unmatched by the other companies. So the reality, to answer that question, is Microsoft still a good home for your career? I think it's a yes, but. So let me expand what I mean by this. It's essentially a good home if you climb, if you raise up the value that you add, if you understand what's possible with your skill set and how to maximize the value that you deliver in a changing time. It can be a trap if you just think that you're going to spend the next few years being asked to build a power app and your expertise is kind of building the most awesome power app in the world. That era's gone. That's been commoditized. What you can do now is move up. So thinking about Power Platform and the ecosystem specifically, look, these are just my ideas, but I think one tip would be focus on the governance side. We're talking about enabling people to create apps and agents at scale. Be part of that. It's not always going to be you doing the app building, doing the creation, but if you can be part of that engine, then you're high value. And similar but different, kind of the idea of an app and agent COE. So when we've got people out in the business that aren't professional app and agent creators, well, these apps need to go on a grow-up story. They need to come into somewhere that has been the app that this person in finance created and needs to be matured, be optimized. We need to use evaluations. We need to tune the data. We need to make sure that agent is as good as it can be. And the business people won't always be able to do that without some expert help. If you do want to focus on building apps and that's your space, well, adopt the new approaches. Build with AI, not alongside it. Switch to code apps. Make sure that you understand how to build with GitHub Copilot or something outside of the Power Platform. Experiment with Claude Code. Just understand the tools available to you. Maybe come up a few levels and make sure your organization or your clients are making the right choices in AI. Is this a Power Platform thing? Is this a Foundry agent? Is this an agent? Is this an app? Should this have screens? Is it okay to have chat? What's the right path that this use case should go down? How is this problem best solved? And elevate yourself to that level. And finally, kind of come up all the way to the top and think about kind of the business sense. Think about strategy and are we getting a return on investment for this? What about the FinOps? Are we really optimized for costs? These are just some of the spaces that will be hugely valuable to most organizations when some of the older spaces are changing significantly. Okay, let's just kind of wrap up then with some more general skills to evolve. So not Power Platform specific, but I think there are certain changes that we all need to make that I think keep us valuable, keep us safe, really help us provide more value than we ever did before. I think the first one is, become an expert in driving AI tools. Find what is the most important, most valuable AI tool that is relevant to your role in your organization. Does anybody here pay for an AI subscription alongside something given to them by their employers? Yeah, that's quite a few. Look, I'm not saying that is something that you absolutely have to do. I pay for 3 AI subscriptions. Look, I'm the CTO of my company. Does my company have what's best for Chris O'Brien as its primary mission? No. The company's primary mission is to serve its clients and stakeholders, not look after me. And I'm on the leadership team, but I will go outside of what my employer is giving to me to make sure that I am kind of staying pace and taking abreast of what's out there. So something to think about. You need to just understand, how to drive AI most effectively. Your analysis and critical thinking, AI is not nailing everything just yet. So how do you add that value? That kind of confident output that AI gives, how do you make sure that you're kind of tuning that to your organization? Can you be an expert in what your company does, how you serve clients, your products, your services? That's something that is difficult for AI to replicate. How do you bridge the business and the technical world? How do you translate something to technology and implementations and what a skill might do to solve or automate this process into what executives understand? That's valuable. And then how do you really drive change? How do you kind of maximize almost like the redesign of work, the redesign of an organization? Can you be part of that? These are skills to really develop and to work on. What does that mean in practical changes? Look, I think as well as skills to develop, there are almost like behaviors. So just 4 quick ones. One of my real kind of strong feelings is that people need to get better at crossing the streams. So if you're a technical person, you need to understand more about how your leaders and executives and senior people on the client side think. How do they consider where AI adds value? And how do you become closer to that? What are the discussions in that boardroom or in that leader community? How do they think about return on investment from AI and what gets funded and what doesn't? If you're on the business side, folks here really need to get their hands dirty. They need to build their own agents and understand what's easy and what's difficult and understand some of the practicalities that the more technical makers do. Otherwise, we've got leaders saying, use more AI, and that doesn't really work. Things come better when the two sides come closer together, so spend time on the other side. Another one is kind of work on your information diet. So what you consume will really guide your thinking. And you'll get these slides afterwards, but just a few tips from me. The Economist and its coverage of AI, you might think that's dry and really boring, but it really helps you understand what's happening in the world. The Dwarkesh podcast, everybody in Silicon Valley and software and SaaS, that's practically mandatory listening, but it's a really interesting read for where AI is going and what's happening at Anthropic and OpenAI. And there's somebody called Ben Evans with his What Matters in Tech site and podcast. You'll get some really good insights from that. Another one is just find high-value things to automate in your business. Don't wait for somebody else to come along and change what happens in your department or your role. You should be the person that is trying to automate that yourself and then take that story upwards. So don't just sit back waiting for change to happen around you. Be part of that. Otherwise, it will happen around you. And perhaps my final one is throw yourself into things. Try and connect yourself to the business. Understand how it makes money, what some of the major risks are, what's keeping the executives up at night, and then try and kind of put yourself into the heart of rewiring that part of the business. Because if you understand how AI creates value for your company and you can actually deliver it, then you are hugely valuable, more valuable than you've ever been in your career. And you are safe and you've got a bright future. So a series of kind of key skills and actions to take now, and perhaps some specific thoughts around the Power Platform and spaces to move into. I think key point is this is unprecedented. We don't have all of the answers, but I would encourage you not just to think about some of the low-level detail of how technology is evolving. Think about what is changing in the world, what is changing in your organization and the organizations you serve. Think about what that means for your career. Thank you very much for listening. It's been a privilege. Thank you.